Welcome to the Journeys podcast. My name is Alexander Faubel, and each week I bring you an inspiring person or story that can help you uncover your own true potential. We deal with the question of what influence psychedelics play on the path to self-actualization and inner healing. We share experiences and present both traditional and modern mental health tools that can support you on your path to living the life your heart truly desires. Great to have you here with me today, and now let the journey begin. This podcast covers topics that can touch on the subject of drugs. This format is purely educational and is not an invitation to use drugs. Furthermore, the use and/or trading of drugs is punishable by law. This podcast is not suitable for persons under the age of 18. Be responsible, be safe, and do your own research. This episode is the longest I've ever recorded so far, and it is a really deep dive into another tool that crossed my own path in the last couple of years, and it's called human design reading. This episode will not be for you if you're not interested in spirituality or alternative methods to view reality as it currently exists for you. I myself was never a real believer into astrology or horoscopes and stuff like that, which is considered by so many as too much woo-woo, and I agreed. So I was really skeptical at first when I had my first own human design reading done by Justus 2 years ago. And since I'm a really practical person, hence my love for psychedelic experiences, because like no other tool that I know, they can bridge the gap between concepts in our minds and the real subjective experience one can have. I had my first reading done with my today's guest, Justus, and I was really, really impressed by what he told me about myself without having any further insights into my life other than my name, my birth date and time, and my birthplace. And I actually learned more aspects about myself than I had known before my reading, and I still use some of these insights today when I'm stuck or I realize again that I'm living in a certain pattern or in a loop and I'm running out of energy or something like that. So again, this podcast is a really deep dive into a concept that is so vast and broad that a normal reading itself takes about 90 minutes, and we try to cover everything from its history of origins to the workings itself and my personal story with it. So if this is for you, I hope you enjoy this, and if you're interested, you'll find Justus' contact information in the show notes to reach out to him. He's happy to help you out with your personal reading. I can really recommend working with him. I've done several of those readings with him over the years now, and he's really good at what he does. So yeah, feel free to reach out to him if you like. I look forward to seeing you here next time. Until then, as you know, be yourself. All right then, Justus, thanks for joining me in today's conversation. And it's been a while since we spoke last, but we've been in contact since I think 2 years ago, roughly, when a friend of mine made the introduction. I received my first human design reading from you as a gift. And I was super skeptical, I have to be honest, at the beginning of it, since I was completely not into astrology or horoscopes, etc. And it from just the looks of it, it sounded to me like something like that. But after the 1 hour we spent together and you did my reading, I was pretty much blown away by the insights you gave me about myself that I, on the one side, had not even thought of myself, and on the other, it felt like as if you would have known me for 20 years and told me some hidden secrets about my psychology and stuff that I really wasn't aware of. And it felt really like a light bulb went on and something clicked, and a lot of stuff that I was working on at the time made way more sense now. And now looking back 2 years ago, I actually used a lot from your reading up to this day. So I think we will go into this a little later, but so just to point that out at the beginning of the recording, this tool, human design, did help me a lot to just realize that when I'm not aligned with certain elements of myself, it can just get a little itchy and edgy along the way. So it just gave me more confidence that it's pretty much normal when I experience some emotions or turbulences along the way, and I can reflect upon what the design chart told me. So that's just kind of the precursor and the context. So if we would like to just dig into it right away, when I'm asked about to explain what human design is, and obviously I'm the complete amateur, so I hand over the microphone in a second to you. But what I come up with is something like, if you imagine a logical system like a map that explains how you were built from birth and how to best respond to the world, like a combination between astrology, the Kabbalah, the chakra system, and quantum physics, and maybe Myers-Briggs, then you get a rough idea of what that human design concept is. It's kind of a combination of all of these tools that shows you a blueprint, so to say, for how you operate in the world and how to interact in the world in the best possible way. That's the way I explain it, at least. And now I would love to hear it from the pro himself.
Yeah.
What is human design, Justus, and where did it originate from?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. It's quite an honor to be able to reach out to a larger audience about something that I have so much passion about. Human design was something that both evolved slowly and quickly. It originated here on the island of Ibiza, and basically some fellows got together and were having, I guess, ongoing conversations about life, the universe, and everything. And one of the topics that they were exploring was what would happen if one took the ancient Chinese calendar that the I Ching is based on. The 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are also can also be read as a calendar. So the ancient Chinese had many ways of getting at truths, including through time, and also with astrology, one uses the calendar. And the question was, what happens if one merges the precession of planets and in the Western calendar, along with the Chinese I Ching, and then mix that together with a few other things that seem to coincide. For example, in the I Ching, there are 64 different hexagrams, and in a gene we have 64 different codons. And there was a curiosity about how there might be a correlation between our genetic makeup and this ancient Chinese wisdom. Anyway, this Canadian fellow, and I never remember exactly his last name. It's something like Robert Krakowski or Krasinski or something. But in any case, he had, I suppose, what you could call a semi-mystical experience, where he, in some ways, integrated all of this information from these different conversations and felt like he was almost possessed and or that might be my word, but in any case, it took him 7 days to sort of download a coherent approach to what later became human design. And in that process, he heard a voice that explained everything to him. And at the end of it, he changed his name to Ra Uhuru Hu, which take it or leave it, it's another one of these spiritual names, I guess. But in any case, he's now referred to as Ra by the community. So what interests me about human design is, and first off, the first time I heard about it, as well as how you described it, I was very skeptical. I knew quite a bit about astrology, but I was more interested in hands-on experimental approaches to life that were concrete. And so my first exposure to human design, I sort of dismissed it. But then a few years later, I had a conversation over dinner with a friend of mine who really knows about this stuff. And the way he explained it to me made so much sense that I decided that I wanted to try it out. And that's one of the key things about human design, before I get into the details about it, is one is not asked to believe any of the descriptions of what human design is. One is asked to try it on for oneself, to experiment with it, to see what happens when one lives according to the unique design each of us is born with.
By the way, this is what I loved about it, exactly how you explained it, because take away all of the judgmental aspects of it potentially. You just get the reading, even if you just do the chart itself and you just have a look at it and get the explanation. That normally resonates a lot. But then if you live accordingly to it, I mean, it's just experimental wisdom. I mean, you just feel it or you don't, but you're not asked to believe in anything. That's completely right.
And this to me is key. It's I'm so tired of theories and assertions that one has to accept on faith. It's much more satisfying for me as an individual to explore things through life experience, and this is what human design offers. You're offered up a blueprint of the moment you're born, a little bit like astrology. And that shows you the very unique components that make up the unique you. And we live in a society, whether it's in the West or the East, that pressures us all to become as much alike each other as possible. There's sort of a evening out of the differences, and I think this is probably one of the greatest challenges to us as a species on this planet, is to learn how to live as our unique selves rather than be pressured into behaving in certain ways by friends, family, culture, society, etc. So one of the things that Ra also talks about is neutrinos. Neutrinos are a subatomic particle that is produced in radioactive decay, and also through fusion and fission. So most of the neutrinos that hit us on Earth are generated in the sun through the fusion of hydrogen into helium, but there are a few other processes as well. And neutrinos are a remarkable particle that has almost no mass. The only thing that has no mass that we know of in physics are photons, and neutrinos have almost no mass, and so they travel through the universe almost at the speed of light. And because they almost have no mass and they only interact at the weak atomic level, they pass through virtually everything. Are you following me so far?
I am.
These neutrinos, they come in different flavors and different variants. And as we're speaking now, you've had a few billion neutrinos just go through, a small area of your body like your thumbnail. So we are being bombarded. Everything, everywhere is being bombarded by neutrinos from all over the universe all the time. And the fact that there are three different flavors or three different states of neutrinos, to me, evokes the nature of the computers we're now using to communicate with each other. We have the ones and zeros of binary computer language, and that creates all of the possibility we have of watching things on our, interacting with things through apps and stuff on our computers. Well, the universe has something similar to these 1 and 0 bits in these neutrinos, which have three different states. So in a sense, one could say that these neutrinos that are passing through everything all over the universe, through the moon, through the Earth, through Jupiter, hitting us, a neutrino can pass through me and then pass through you. So all of this time, all of these neutrinos are passing through everything all the time. And as they sometimes weakly interact with things, they change state. And so in a certain way, you could say that the whole universe is kind of like a computer with all of this information being passed around via these neutrinos. So the reason I got onto this bit about these elemental particles is because it helps me to understand a little bit more why there seems to be some sort of even in astrology and some of these other ways of understanding the world, whether it's tarot or astrology or whatever, one could explain some of the influences, say, of Jupiter or the moon on one's chart because of these neutrinos, because there is information being passed around all the time. So anyway, Ra then explained that these neutrinos are exactly why the human design charts have meaning. The exact time that you're born, along with that moment about 3 months before you're born, because the human design chart is put together with two different sets of time: the exact moment of birth and 3 months before birth, which is about 6 months of gestation, which is also the first time the fetus in pregnancy is can survive being born, around 6 months. So it's like two different halves of us are melded together with these two different time points in time, and to create this chart. And the one set of data represents the unconscious, that which we are not consciously aware of, and the other represents the conscious side. So if you look at your human design chart, there will be bits that are in black and bits that are in red in the chart. And all of the things that are red represent the unconscious, and all of the data points that are black represent the conscious. So there's something very satisfying about the sort of elemental structure of the human design chart, in that it incorporates so very much everything from ancient Chinese wisdom and astrology to, as you say, the chakras and so on. Although I would like to point out that Myers-Briggs has had no part in the structuring of the field of human design, but that's an aside. In any case, we have the conscious, we have the unconscious, we have planets, we have genetics, we have the planets, and all of this combined together is in a sense a snapshot, a photograph of who you were born as. Now, the actual chart that describes you, in your case, Alexander, you're a manifestor, and I'll get into that in a moment, what a manifestor is. This is who you were at the moment of your birth. Already 5 minutes later, 2 days later, 30 years later, you will never be that chart again, because the planets are always in constant motion. Pluto, for example, takes way over 200 years to go around the sun. So nobody alive today will ever have Pluto in the same place that it was when they were born, because nobody lives that long, obviously. So anyway, this combination of this data from the planets, along with this the hexagrams, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, and the different lines that make up these, the genetics, all of these things and the psychology are welded together, merged together in the human design chart. And because nobody alive can ever experience the same configuration of planets and moon and so on, nobody alive today has the same chart as anyone else. Even twins who are born a few minutes apart will have very subtle differences. So one of the main sort of ideas of human design is that each of us are completely unique individuals. Now, we might share certain traits in common with others. Obviously, some people are born with a male body, and some people are born with a female body. Some people are born with Down syndrome, etc., etc. But besides those kind of categories, when you look a little bit more deeply, human design shows how incredibly different we are, and that there's something beautiful in embracing that difference and owning that difference, and instead of using authorities on the outside, one can learn to discover one's own inner authority, and the inner authority is what helps us to make decisions. And that is one of the key topics of human design, in a sense, the art and science of making correct decisions. Because ultimately in life, that's, we make decisions almost every second of the day, whether to look this direction or that direction, to say yes or to say no, to go left or to go right, or to stop or whatever. So we're always making decisions. And one of the problems on this planet for our species is that too often we make the wrong decisions that aren't compatible with the way that we are constructed, the way that we are built as individuals.
There's so much, Justus. I just want to briefly summarize up to here before we go into this. So much we can go into now. But just to reflect a little bit, when I go back and think about the design reading you did for me, when I was at that time, I just finished was in the middle of my sabbatical. I was traveling the world. I had tons of time to work on myself. And the previous years beforehand, I did read tons of books on self-help, personal development, growth, strategies, podcasts, videos, like everything. Yeah, right. I did my nose into everything that I could get my hands on. And I was just trying to find out what was wrong with me. That was kind of the innate feeling I had, was like, I'm earning that much money. Everyone tells me that I should be humble and enjoy my life. And I just feel like this is not it. It's just something missing. And I was looking for answers somewhere to give me a better sense and feeling of what is wrong with me. And what the human design reading then did initially was to kind of give me another perspective on this idea that I am broken, right? So that people are running around and thinking they're broken, and they need to kind of fill up that hole inside of them. And that's why they seek outside of themselves for answers to fill that hole. And to me, the human design system basically just help me or help someone to realize that every person, like you just said, every individual on this planet is born with a unique design and is completely different. Even identical twins have a different design. So we are not broken, and yet we run around and try to fill up those places. But there is an fundamental truth to this design concept that I found, which is we all have our own mythology and purpose that we are designed to live out, our own gifts and magic that we can bring to the world and serve something maybe greater than ourselves. And those will unfold naturally when we are aligned with our, I would call it mechanics, right? If we live aligned to this fundamental principle that is based in human design. And when I got this, and then your explanation of my chart, I was like, of course, I feel completely drained of energy when I do X, Y, Z. And you kind of gave me a structure to realize that this is just who I am. That's just my kind of mechanics and how my system, my body, consciousness, and everything works, that I don't have an endless amount of energy. I need to take time off and recharge myself. And I just have to watch out that I don't overdo it, which I'm tended to do, so I don't burn out. And then obviously we talked about the burnout I had and how I would kind of the lead up to it and everything. So just as a kind of a summary up to here, it helped me get another perspective on why I thought I was not functioning right. That the idea that I'm broken, and it totally and completely changed that perspective, and it helped me tremendously on that level.
Yeah, that's a good summary. Well, let me just point out that the way that we are built to function and the way that society influences us to function differently are in human design called living as self versus living as not self. And not self is basically all of the pressures and the conditioning and the influences of other people. If we admire somebody, we might want to be like them, or if somebody pressures us to be a certain way in order to be rewarded with something, whether it's at work or in the private life, then we might change in order to fit in. And it's all of this sort of this sum of years and years and years of trying to fit in and trying to adapt to the wants and needs and expectations of others. Most of us, by the time we are in our teens, are living not as our design, but as that which others have pressured us to be, whether consciously or unconsciously. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the wonderful thing about human design, the thing that actually turned me onto it and made me want to dig deep into it. And now I'm in the 7th year of my experiment. So I've been practicing what it's like to be me for 7 years. And it hasn't always been easy. Sometimes I've stumbled. Sometimes I've found myself doing something that is very conditioned rather than acting as myself. But slowly but surely, as I progressed through a lot of different situations, some quite monumental and some really quite small, I've come more and more and more into living as myself rather than some sort of distorted version that the people in society around me have demanded of me or expected of me, and so on. And
yeah, that's all of these mental stories of how we cannot be ourselves. The story that just keeps repeating and repeating, but just simply knowing and understanding how oneself is hardwired is so helpful, which is why this system of human design to me came so handy. Just to see and understand, just obviously to have a visual expression of it as a real map or a blueprint, and then get the explanation behind it. Just kind of to understand that the hardware that is there is the reason why I'm functioning the way I do. And then kind of slowly but surely, like you just explained, it's a lifelong process to truly unlearn stuff that we were forced to learn, and then to realize kind of underneath all of those layers of conditioning our true self. And what I talk about with people on this podcast is really to find the kind of talk about tools, strategies, and methods that I was able to use to realize more of that underlying truth of myself. Like who am I deep down there? If I get rid of the fears and the worries and the judgments and all of it, like what's the core underneath? And human design was another really helpful tool for me to just kind of get to the blueprint idea of how my kind of operating model in the world is structured.
Exactly. Well, to bring it all of what I've been talking about into a little bit more specifics and sort of finding a way to look a little bit more closely at your chart. Basically, as I pointed out, there are two sets of data, two sets of, I suppose, Western astrological data. The exact moment when we take our first breath at birth, as well as 88 days before and about 3 months before. These two data sets, these two different times, generate two different maps of the sky, of the planetary configurations at the time of our birth. Now, my talk earlier about neutrinos, for me, is a somewhat satisfactory explanation of why the position of the planets makes a difference. Why is something that is so many millions of kilometers away influencing me in any way? How is that possible? Modern science struggles with questions like that, and it's very easy for more rational-minded people to dismiss astrology as being mostly nonsense. But if we start to think of the entire universe as this a living brain or incredibly complex computer where the motion of everything connected together with all of these neutrinos whizzing around at nearly the speed of light, it suddenly takes on almost mystical proportions in the sense that we might be living in a sentient universe, and we might, as individuals, be comparable to individual neurons inside the brain or something like that. But anyway, enough of speculation. Because of the position, two different sets of data of the positions 3 months before birth and at the time of birth, one has then generated a lot of data points. And these data points are kind of like a normal, or two sets of a horoscope. And when they're blended together along with the I Ching and along with the evolved chakra system, so instead of 7 centers, human design says that we are 9-centered beings. And as a side, I can point out that this evolution from 7-centered beings to 9-centered beings happened in 1781 with the discovery of the planet Uranus by, I think his name was William Herschel. And this was the first time that we saw with our eyes, we were able to measure as a species, a planet that was not evident to our ancestors. And so if we go back 200,000 years or 2,000 years or 10,000 years, the night sky was a source of a great amount of wonder to our ancestors. They look at these stars and try to figure out what they were, and then they see that there's things like the moon and the sun and different planets that are moving about. And so they created all kinds of stories about these planets being gods. So Jupiter was one of the bigger planets and therefore was the king of the gods and so on. And in total, we could see 7 different moving objects in the night sky. We could see the moon, we could see the sun, we could see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And strangely enough, we have 7 days of the week, all named after these moving celestial objects. In the ancient Southeast Asia, we have the development of the chakra system, again, 7. And so we had 7 centers, we had 7 gods, we had 7 planets, 7 days of the week, and I'm sure there are other 7s that I'm forgetting in the moment. And we were, in a sense, at an earlier stage of evolution as human beings, as observers of the universe. And then with the discovery of Uranus in 1781, this marked a shift in how we operate. One of the major shifts is the evolution of the emotional center. In the chakra system, we have the heart, which represents something of the emotions and something of compassion and something of higher self and so on. But with this split in 1781 from 7 to 9 centers, we have now an emotional center, which is a center that is still in evolution. So before 1781 and going back several thousand years, Emotions were more sort of spontaneous actions. One could erupt with laughter or anger or burst into tears and so on, but there wasn't necessarily anything to learn about these emotions. They were just natural, almost animalistic reactions to what life served up to us. But what happened with this evolution that we are now in the middle of is that emotions are now something that we can learn from, something that we can that grow in awareness about, and also in your case and coincidentally in mine, with both of us having a defined emotional center, we are also using the ongoing process of waves of emotion that are continuous for us to gain clarity about important decisions in our life. In any case, this combination of data from the planets that puts together this chart, along with the codons and the hexagrams and the astrology, creates a map. And that's really just what it is. This is not truth. It's a map. It's a guide to understanding something more fundamental, something deeper. And this map now has 9 centers as opposed to the 7. And based on where different planets were at the time of birth and 3 months before, we find out which parts of the map are lit up and which parts of the map are in a sense silent or neutral. And these different combinations of planets lead to different design shapes or different design constellations that can be roughly divided into 4 major categories based on which parts of the chart are lit up or in which parts of the chart are in a sense silent or open or of infinite potential. One way you could describe it is that everything that is defined in a chart is the student. That is who we are. This is who we are born as. And everything undefined in the chart are the lessons that we're here to learn. And so whenever looking at a human design chart, one can have as little as 2 of these 9 centers defined, and as much as 9. And there is no better or worse. So if you have 9 centers defined, or if you have 2 centers defined, or something in between, it's all exactly of the same value in a sense. There is nothing better or worse about one type of design or another, whether there is a lot that's defined or a lot that's undefined.
Not sure if this is just me or mankind in general, but when I saw my chart and compared it to a friend of mine, and he had like 8 out of 9 centers defined, lots of colors, it was filled up, and mine was pretty much empty. My first initial thought was, I'm screwed. Like, I'm not as evolved or equipped or whatever than my buddy. And the way you explained it to me was really a shift as well, coming back to my self-judgment mental attitude normally, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I need to grow faster and that definition that you just gave, like the defined centers, so everything that is filled out, you could see as this is who you are, you're the student, and the undefined ones are the lessons. But if you reframe that, you can say there's so much that you are still able to learn where the other person might not learn as much in those particular areas than you can. So more adventure, more joy for you to explore in that specific domain.
I mean, basically, we all have different roles in this life. Some are here to guide, some are here to be the eternal student. Yeah, I mean, some people are here to be artists, some people are here to be engineers. It's like not one is better than the other. Just because the engineer doesn't have a lot of interest for art doesn't make him better or worse than the artist who doesn't have much interest for engineering.
Mm.
And so having a lot of centers defined or a lot of bits defined or a lot of bits open and undefined, neither is better or worse. I can say, for example, that, and I'll get into the names of the centers and get into a little bit more detail in a minute, but one of the centers we have, which is on the other side of the emotional center, it's called the spleen. This has to do with survival and health and safety. And so, on a personal note, I have this center undefined, as do you, and my girlfriend has it defined. So the two of us had a very, very different approach to the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown. For me, with this undefined center that has to do with health and safety, I wouldn't say that I was at the level of panic, but my level of stress about the pandemic, about the COVID virus, was vastly more heightened than my girlfriend's. I mean, she took everything with a grain of salt and complied with the different ordinances, and we did our lockdown and stuff. But she wasn't really all that nervous. Whereas for me, I went from almost a state of panic and being overly cautious. Then through the months, as I learned more about the virus, more about the evolution of things and the variants and the medicines and the vaccines and et cetera, I got to the point where I, in a sense, learned the lesson of COVID. And this is an example of what these, so an undefined center, undefined spleen for me, took me on a journey of discovery and learning and understanding and eventually wisdom about this that took me on a real roller coaster ride. And so I have, in the process of these two years of COVID, gotten to a place where I feel as comfortable and relaxed and easy about things as my girlfriend did near the beginning. She didn't need to understand it. She just had this trust that her system, her body, would keep her safe. Whereas I had to learn about it, how to be safe, because I cannot rely on an open center. An open center, an undefined center, depicts something that is not consistent. It's not reliable. It's not something that you can lean on with any kind of confidence. And so a way to summarize this is that all the defined bits of the chart are areas that you've kind of already, you got this, you understand this. It's not something you're here to spend lots of time studying and learning. It's a given. Whereas the open bits are the areas that are opportunities for wonderment and exploration and learning and maybe sometimes a roller coaster ride from almost panic to a sort of a serene, relaxed wisdom about things. And I just talked about the spleen being defined and undefined and the differences, but this is pretty much true of all parts of the chart. So anywhere that you have white, I mean, in a sense, your 3 defined centers and your 6 undefined centers create a wonderful opportunity for you both to be confident about certain aspects of yourself and either uncomfortable or unconfident about other parts, or shifting and reframing that to curious and in wonder about and eager to explore. So, you know, the way we describe things can definitely shift if we give ourselves enough room to do so.
Yeah, 100%.
So to look more closely at your chart, I have to do. I mean, I think it's probably wise for me to go a little bit into some of the main categories we have in human design. So the combination of these planets defines these different centers. So very much like the chakra system, at the top of the chart, we have what in human design is called the head center. Now, the head center is analogous with the crown chakra, but these are not chakras. They're a little bit different, but they're also similar in the sense that they describe certain areas of our life. So the head center is the only center in human design that is partially associated with the body and partially outside of the body. And the head center has to do with wonder. It has to do with exploration. It has to do with the questions maybe that are more sort of philosophical and spiritual. It has to do with asking questions. And sometimes these questions are not answerable, like what is the meaning of life and questions like this. Mm-hmm. Then right below that, we have a center that is called the ajna, as it is in the chakra system. So the head and the ajna together represent the mind, the full mind, the head chakra having to do with philosophy and spiritual questions like what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? Who am I? And the ajna, the mind, the conscious mind, is more about figuring out the correct way to do things, like to bake a perfect apple pie or to build a Lego set, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Right below that, we have the throat center. This is analogous with the throat chakra in the chakra system. It has to do with communication. It has to do with listening and taking in information. And it also has to do with manifesting, in the sense, not like law of attraction of drawing things to us, but more in the sense of expressing something new into the world, a little bit along the lines of one of the versions of Genesis where, in the beginning is the word, in the beginning is the logos, in the beginning there is the utterance of let it be. And it is that sort of expression through the voice that brings creation into being. There's a story about Mozart, where he was asked how he composed these operas and sonatas and symphonies and so on, because someone had noticed that his notation, his original writing of these different works, contained no errors. There was no scratching out of notes, no corrections, no amendments to what he wrote. And he explained that basically he heard the music and just wrote it down. And this, in a sense, is true manifesting. Manifesting isn't about wanting something and drawing it to us. It's about letting the muse speak freely through us. Mm-hmm. And this is all about the throat. And so in your case, you have the throat defined along with an energy center, but we'll get to that in a moment. And so for you, manifesting isn't, again, it is not about deciding you want something mentally and then finding a way to make it. It's more about being caught up by the muse, caught up by the zeitgeist, caught up by some sort of inspirational thing that, in a sense, has to be expressed through you.
Yeah.
And so that is how you create. That is how you manifest. Manifest comes from, I guess it must be Latin. The man is the same as mano in Spanish or main in French. It's the hand. It's about making something real. It's making something concrete. Anyway,
that's, by the way, just to put that in here. That's, by the way, the reason why this podcast has been created. It stuck with me that the way you explained it, and we'll get to that in a second, that I, according to human design, am a manifester.
Yes.
And the power of that is that I'm able to create something where there's nothing. So from the unconscious to make it conscious, and then go into the world and form something tangible and create something out of thin air, so to say. But I have to be kind of, like you said, like guided by it, versus have to think about it in my mind and then come up with a concrete concept, idea, strategy, and then get it out into the world. It's a different kind of approach and process for me to form something than another potentially type, like a generator would do.
Exactly. One sort of limited metaphor is that you are like a radio set receiving a signal and then sharing that with the room. It's not that you are the source of the signal. It's just that you are open to transmitting it, receiving it.
Exactly. That's why for instance, the podcast format here is a great example, because for me, the idea behind it is there's nothing new to this. And the stuff that I share is just stuff that I learned and which helped me along the way. But I have a really deep felt purpose when I talk about this, because it resonates with me so deeply, because it helped me personally that much that I want to share it with the world. And that is kind of the analogy of what you just shared with the radio receiver. Yeah.
So those are the three top centers: the head, the ajna, and the throat. And then if we continue straight down, we have this diamond-shaped center, which is called the self. And the self is about direction. It is about love. It is about identity. And in a sense, it is an evolution and a refinement of the old heart chakra. It has to do with love, but it's not animal love. It's not sexual love. It's about a more sort of a spiritual approach to love, more of a holy kind of thing. But it's called the self center. It's also, a lot of these centers have more than one name. It's also called the G center. I think that stands for the center of gravity. But this self center is primarily about learning that only when we love ourselves are we capable of loving others. And so for you who has this center open, you have a journey, a lifelong journey of discovery, of mastering some of the nuances of this center, and then understanding that, as you described at the beginning of the podcast, that you thought there was something wrong with you. And the self center is all about learning to release a lot of these conditioned thoughts and ideas and valuations of yourself, and truly embrace how you were designed to be.
That one was so big for me, because the search for the sense of self, which according to the chart is just missing, right? It's like an open center. So the sense of self, so the struggle that I always was on, kind of to find answers to the question, am I good enough? Like, who am I? Like this notion of, I can tell you who I am, and in a sense of my own self. And that was missing. And the feeling accompanying it was always missing. And the chart and the explanation just told me that this will be the case. So instead of beating myself up for it, like, why can't I just, feel a certain way about it, realizing, okay, this is just a room for growth for me, for a lifelong journey of kind of understanding what it means for me to love myself and find the goodness in who I am without having a concrete picture or ideology or mental construct of it, like I was potentially learning when I was growing up. And since it's missing, I kind of feel a sense of lack in that center.
Well, yes. I think you're making a very good point. Rather than saying missing, all we can, it's more neutral to say that it's undefined, that you have a greater amount of flexibility and potential for exploring self than somebody who has this defined. Somebody who has it defined have a very consistent identity, and they're very sure of themselves, but there's not much flexibility there. And so you can say that not having something feels kind of like a lack, or you can say that not having something just means that you have much more variability and potentiality to explore and learn and play. And so I really want to emphasize that having something defined is not better than having something undefined. It just means that it's a different approach to the same area of concern, or the area of of this particular topic. So having an undefined self-center, I have this as well, share that with you. It also allows for adaptability. I found myself being able in high school where, notoriously teenagers will have different cliques. You have the athletes, and you have the nerds, and you have the popular girls, and all these different groupings, the music club and the druggies or whatever. And I found with my undefined self-center that I could essentially fit into most, if not all, of these different groupings because I didn't have a fixed identity. I didn't have a fixed self. So it allowed me to explore much more of the potentiality of whatever direction I was going to go in as an adult, because I could pretty much fit in anywhere. So there are some advantages along with the disadvantages of having an undefined center or a defined center.
I want to point something out here again, because you're completely right. I should say undefined instead of missing. In my case, which is why what I framed at the beginning of the podcast, even though I was suspicious of the whole thing before we started, you mentioned stuff to me that kind of were my own words that I used to kind of explain the sense of who I am before I had an idea of human design. And the word I used was, I've often sometimes felt like a chameleon in school, that I was always able to fit into groups and people. And I didn't there was not a lot of judgment towards certain types of people. And for me, it was easy to get along with everyone. Now, during high school years and school times, and as long as I was seeing this as a flaw and something that was bad and missing and not right about me, obviously it created a sense of lack. But now seeing this as a valid, like a huge potential and strength, actually, in the way where I work with people nowadays, I can work with everyone. There's not a person on the planet, I would say, that I can't get along with and use the skills that comes with the undefined self-center for me to be open enough to and flexible enough to just kind of reinvent, so to say, who I want to be in a particular setup or time. So just want to point that out. Yeah, great.
That's really excellent. I mean, for me, it got to the point that when I dated different women from different even countries, I would find myself taking on their dialect of English. I mean, I was so flexible that I didn't even have a sort of a fixed voice. But anyway, this flexibility, I mean, everything, whether something is sort of fixed and predetermined or flexible and open, each of these things has its advantages and disadvantages, and it's useful to explore both sides of things, I think. So in a sense, the challenge for this center, for this self that has to do with direction and love, is it's about finding oneself in the correct place with the correct people. It's about discovering and exploring all of the aspects of love, from love of self to love of other to love of humanity and that sort of thing. The center that is right next to the self, this little triangle, is called the heart, or as I said, a lot of these centers have more than one name. It is also the ego. And the ego, in this sense, is the Latin meaning of the word I. It's this sense of being separate, this sense of being a unique individual. There's this part of ourselves that we identify with the experience of seeing red or hearing a beautiful bass line in a piece of music. It's this sense of self that has to do with being alive. The ego, or the heart, also is the center of willpower and courage and sacrifice. It is linked with the tribal aspect of human beings. We have our individual self, we have our family, we have our tribe, we have our community, and so on. So this sense of self and identity that is also linked with the sense of self in the G center or the self center. Combine these two centers, say something about who we are and what our values are in this life. And the thing about this heart center, this ego center, is that something like 2/3 of the population do not have this defined. It's one of the rarer centers to have defined because it doesn't have that many opportunities to be defined, since there are only 4 channels that go into it. The only one that is even less common is the top center, the head. In any case, because the heart center has to do with willpower, uh, and willpower is connected with making and keeping promises. Having this center undefined it means that it is not a center that we can rely on for consistency. And so, no matter how enthusiastic or honest or eager we are to make a promise, having this center undefined, it means that it is very hard to keep promises because we do not have consistent access to willpower. And so, with the vast majority, 2/3 of humans not having the center defined means that most of us do not have consistent willpower, which means that most of us should not be making commitments and promises that are based on willpower that may or may not be there on any given day. And so this also relates to the whole self-help industry is based on helping people mentally to compensate for this lack of motivation to go to the gym every day or keep one's kitchen in top-notch shape or whatever it is. And so this can lead to senses of challenges to one's self-worth, because the heart center has to do with self-worth. Am I good enough? Is what I'm doing good enough? Is my relationship good enough? And so on. And so with the vast majority of people having issues with this, it's not at all a surprise that the self-help section of bookstores and the internet is so populated with solutions to this center having the challenge of worthiness. And so for someone such as yourself with an undefined ego and undefined heart, with just the one gate 21 defined in it, it's very important for you to understand that all of these questions having to do with self-worth and am I good enough or what's wrong with me are ultimately questions that will not lead you anywhere. It's more about how can I learn about worthiness? How can I learn about commitment and willpower and sacrifice? Because this is not something that's built into you as something that you've got. This is an area for you to explore and learn. So I happen to be one of these 1/3 of the population that has this center defined, and for me, it is very easy to make commitments. It's very easy to make and keep promises. Not that I always keep them 100% of the time. After all, we're all human. But the point is, I know what it's like to have this as a given. I have no problem with small sacrifices to get things done. And so, as a parent, all of my children have this center undefined, and it was a big learning lesson for me to understand that even though my kids would promise to take out the trash or make dinner or clean their room, I couldn't get angry at them for not keeping their promise because they didn't have the mechanics in place. to allow that to happen easily. And so it's very important that we adapt our approach to life based on who we are rather than the values of society that say you should keep your promises, you should do this, you should do that. Well, not all of us are built to do it that way. So one of the questions I often get about this inability to always follow through on promises and commitments is to find other ways to do it. So if someone comes to me with an open heart center like this, and they say, "Well, I'm having problems. I got this membership at the gym, and I'm just not following through and going there regularly," is to shift and reframe how to do things. Since the heart center has to do with willpower, and since an undefined heart center does not have reliable access to willpower, then we have to find other ways to get the same thing done. So I suggest playing or finding a partner, a gym partner that helps motivate to go and that sort of thing. There's always other solutions. There's always ways to adapt so that our life can unfold in ways that still work, even though we are built differently from the guy next door who consistently goes to the gym. Mm-hmm. Then the next center down from these two, if we go vertically down the chart, is the sacral center. The sacral center is like the hara chakra. It is associated with the sexual organs, sexual reproductive organs, the womb, the testes, and that sort of thing. This is the center that has to do with life itself, the life wanting to live. It is one of the most fundamental of all of the aspects of being alive. It's the plant pushing up through a crack in the asphalt. It's the desire to be a parent. It's life itself. And this center has some of the greatest number of possibilities of being defined because there are so many different channels that lead into it. And so the sacral center is the center that is the most defined. If you look at 1,000 charts, around 70% of them will have this center defined. And so having this center defined creates one of the 4 types that we have in human design. We have manifestors such as yourself, and then every type that has this sacral center defined, around 70% of the population are generators. And then another type that does not have this defined but is not a manifestor are the projectors. By the way, manifestors around 7 to 9% of the population. Then the generators around 70% of the population. Then the next type, which is a projector, and I'll explain the difference between a manifestor and a projector in a moment. The projector is around 20, 22% of the population. And then you have the rarest type of all, which is those who don't have any centers defined at all. Somehow the combination of time of birth and planets makes it so that none of these centers are colored in. And these people, which is less than 1% of the population, are called reflectors. So the manifestor, such as yourself, has one of 4 energy centers or motor centers connected to the throat. In your case, you have the motor center or energy center of emotions that is connected to your throat. And that makes you a manifestor, because there has to be energy that is powered into the throat in order for manifestation to happen, at least according to the human design system. Whereas a projector will also not have the sacral defined, but will not have a connection between one of the 4 motors and the throat. And I'll get back to which of these centers once I've described them all, are motors or energy centers and which are not. In any case, 70% of the population have the sacral center defined. And so in that sense, we all live in a generator world. Generators are here to use the life force, not only in living and reproducing, but also in helping to build and create the world and help the motor of society to run. Generators have access to this life force. It's consistent. It's reliable. They wake up in the morning and just work, get things done, manage to produce a lot, and then at the end of the day, exhausted, they go to sleep, are regenerated at night, and can keep going again the next day. Now, that is very different from you as a manifesto or me as a projector. We do not have access to this life force, which it's like tremendous. It's like having a sun in one's belly. We too do not have this, which means that we cannot rely on an unlimited source of energy to get things done. We have to be a lot more wise about things, and we have to find different ways to operate in this world than generators. Now, the problem is, because we live in a generator world, a majority generator world with almost 3 out of 4 people being a generator, that means that this is one of the strongest forms of conditioning out there. It's the conditioning that says, if you're not working hard, you're lazy. If you're not, if you're having to rest, there's something wrong with you. Or are you depressed? Yeah. There's something wrong. And so,
weak or something. Yeah.
And so this is one of the problems in our society that what is true for most people, for 2 or 3 out of 3 or 4, 67 to 75% of the population, it just, it's hard to understand that there are people that do not have access to this energy without labeling them as lazy.
Just to me, this one was particularly helpful because we did the chart reading also for my best buddy, and he had the sacral defined. He's a generator, and whenever I'm next to him or working alongside of him, I'm kind of, because you mentioned it, it's like they have a sun in their belly, that there's an endless, it seems like they have an endless amount of energy throughout the day. Then he goes to sleep, and the next day he's just up to 100% again. The batteries are recharged. For me, being also working closely and physically next to him, I kind of get the feeling of I'm getting charged by his energy as well. So I'm working alongside of him, the same speed, the same energy. And when you go to sleep, he wakes up the next day fully rested. And I feel like I'm more depleted than before because I just drove 200 miles an hour, but my normal speed and cruising limit is 80. I can do this maybe for a day or two if I then plan accordingly and give myself enough rest. But if I don't do this over a certain period of time, which happened in my early years in my career, where I was just full speed, no gaps, no breaks, no weekends, just full speed, led me to burning out eventually. And that helped me explain why.
Yes. I mean, this is crucial. I mean, around 30% of the population consisting of manifestors, projectors, and reflectors do not have this energy. Unfortunately, we human beings are often led to believe that what the majority thinks or believes or has access to is the norm, and anybody who doesn't do this is abnormal. Instead, we need to shift our understanding of how we are each built slightly differently, and that there is some beauty and inspiration and potentiality in these differences. Instead of judging each other for being different, we can celebrate each other for being different.
Yes.
So the sacral has to do with not just this life force and lots of energy, but it also has to do, I mean, it's life responding to life. So for generators, it is extremely important to wait for the body to respond to whatever life is giving, because it is, after all, the body that is living. The mind is not living. The mind is, however we define it, is not the one doing the living. The mind is the one doing the observing of the living. And so we really want to, human design emphasizes how important it is to get away from the mind's take on the world and instead refocus on the body's take on the world. And this is most apparent for generators, in that they will tend to make either a movement or a sound in response to what's going on. And it's very important for those generators to listen and observe and be present for how the body is reacting to, say, an invitation or a situation. Do they gasp? Do they nod? Do they say mm-hmm or mm-mm? This is the body speaking. This is not the mind expressing itself. This is the body responding, the life in the body responding to life as it throws things at us. And so for those of us who do not have this center defined, whether you're a manifestor like yourself, a projector like myself, or a reflector, we do not have this same sort of attitude towards life. So we're really here to understand the majority. We are here to learn about having this consistent access to life, and to life expressing itself. And one of the things that generators have that the rest of us do not have is this understanding when enough is enough. It's sort of like the generator being able to work the whole day, and then at a certain point they get exhausted, they go to sleep, they're regenerated, and they keep going. And so a generator that's functioning properly will work until the energy is used up so they can actually get to sleep. Because if a generator tries to go to sleep too early, they'll have still too much energy in their body. So it's important for the generator to know, okay, that's enough. Now I have to sleep. And this is true of, and is then reflected in many other aspects of the life. And enough is enough. This is enough. And so generators tend to be better at saying no thank you to a second portion of food, or not eating up all the crisps in a bowl, or not having that fifth glass of beer, or whatever it is. Whereas those of us who are manifestors, projectors, and reflectors, this is one of those lessons that we have to learn. It's like, how do I gain wisdom in knowing when enough is enough? So this is one of those underlying themes that is really worth paying a little bit of attention to for a non-sacral such as yourself or myself.
Just to pinpoint that again, for me, this also was really helpful, because obviously my tendency was to, because the self is not defined, right? This feeling, the sense of I don't know who I am, like the majority of the time I don't have the feeling of like this particular type that I am, and the self-worth accompanying it. I try to make up for this kind of sense of lack by doing more work, and then doing more work with this undefined motor center, so to say, just continues to deplete my energy. And at the end of the day, the week, the month, leads me to a complete drain. Like I'm drained and there's like no energy left. And then the whole negative thoughts and everything is just spiraling down south. And it's just, it's a self-reinforcing negative loop then. So for me, this was like aha moment again, saying, okay, probably potentially, according to human design, my body won't give me the proper signals to say this is enough, stop, go to rest. For me, I have to make a conscious decision to say, okay, a maximum of whatever, 10 hours a day of work, and then you spend 2 hours to just be with yourself, go to the gym, go for a walk, and just replenish your energy reserves and your batteries. But I have to make a conscious decision and make this kind of an element of my agenda throughout the week. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Well, I would go further and say it's not really a mental decision. It's about just being present to the fact that, oh, look, there's no more energy. I have to stop. And so, but it's not this automatic process that the generator has of just instinctively knowing when enough is enough. It's about making a mistake again and again and again, perhaps until one has learned that, wait a minute, this level of energy that I have in my body now, this means that I really need to be careful here, or I could be wiped out for the next 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's about gaining wisdom, about learning, about the lesson that is being offered to us with this undefined center.
Then we have two more, the spleen and the root, and then we have all of those 9.
Right. So the root is the one below the sacral. This is also one of the motor centers, the energy centers. The 4 are the heart, the sacral, the root, and the emotional center. These are centers that have energy to them, but only the sacral has the full-on life force. Willpower, which is associated with the heart, is a type of energy that comes in bursts or spurts. For example, I have this center defined, and I do not have the sacral center defined, and so for me, it manifests if I made a promise to someone that I was going to say bake a cake, and then I'm about to go to sleep, and I realize, oh my God, I forgot about this cake. The will center gives me that extra energy I need for that quick little project of throwing together the batter, putting it in the oven, taking it out, putting it to cool, and then I can go to sleep. It might add, half an hour or an hour to my day, but I have the energy to do this one little thing, and so it's not the energy like the sacral that keep you going day in and day out. It's more about the energy I need to fulfill a promise. The emotional center, it's all about the energy that comes from being angry or sad or happy or inspired or despondent or disappointed or whatever it is. And so this is also energy that's not really that reliable for getting a project done or having the energy to go through a day. It's more the energy of just responding to life as it arises. The root, which is our focus right now, it has to do with some of the most fundamental aspects of being in a body. It's about the distribution of energy to get things done in a meaningful way. So those who have defined roots tend to apply energy to things that make sense to do. So, for example, if I just went to IKEA and have a table or a shelf or something or a bed to mount, the root will help me sort of to focus on getting it done in a timely manner. Whereas very often for people who have the undefined root, there is a great amount of pressure on 2 of the centers, the root and the head. So the top and the bottom have these sort of universal pressures having to do with life itself. So the pressure on the head, which you have undefined, which most people have undefined, is the pressure to figure out what is the meaning of all this? Why am I here? Or, to answer the big questions. Whereas the pressure, so it's about the sort of mental or spiritual aspects of life itself. whereas the root has to do with the pressures of the body, the needs of the body, food or shelter or money or getting things done. And so for the undefined root, such as what you have, the key is to understand that even though that there is a pressure to act, there is a pressure to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should act or do. In other words, there's this pressure that is relieved by just doing something. And so it can often lead people, and this is different from person to person. I mean, one person with an undefined root could act very differently than another person with an undefined root. But the sort of general tendency with the undefined root is to be really busy, often doing nothing. And so this is careful. This is something to be really careful about, in the sense that just because you are doing and relieving the pressure doesn't mean that this is wise. And so this is an area for wisdom to start to realize that running around and doing these 100 different things because perhaps the mind says to do it as a response to this pressure to act can evolve with the wisdom of years and being part of the experiment, the human design experiment, to get to the point where that pressure is something that you can just live with and still wait for the right opportunities to act to come along. I mean, if I'm meant to be doing my taxes and I had an undefined route, the pressure might get me up and help me clean my kitchen and reorder my books and perhaps take a shower. And if I was a woman, maybe paint my nails or whatever. The point being that this pressure to act sometimes can get in the way of doing the things that need doing.
Yeah, this completely resonated with me as well. This was one of the other aha moments when you said you will have the tendency to do a lot of things and not get them done. And then I just had a look at my browser and I had 45 different tabs open. And I was like, I can see it here. Yeah. And like all of the stuff that I do, I have a feeling that had the feeling it's getting better and better. And there was a lot of potential for growth in that area. It doesn't mean that I get shit done by just doing a lot of things, right? It's effective versus productive. And it's sitting down, thinking about what to do, which has the most impact, even though I don't want to do it, but I know it's going to have the largest impact, and then sit down and get this thing done versus just acting out of this pressure that you're mentioning and just doing tons of stuff. And then at the end of the day, actually not feeling satisfied because I've done so much, but actually just, did one step forward instead of 10 meters. So that was another big aha for me. Yeah.
So to go back to this theme of the greatest amount of pressure, so you have this pressure sort of from the universe itself, from the planet itself, from humanity itself to act. And without having a sort of an insight and awareness about this sort of thing, as you say, it can lead to not getting very far, even though one has been very busy. The pressure on the head is a little bit similar, but it doesn't have to do with acting. It's more on the sort of a mental or even a spiritual plane. And the tendency here is to have a pressure to come up with answers. And very often, just like with the root, where we're doing a lot, not because it's something that needed doing, but because we just have this pressure to do. So we end up doing sometimes useless things. The same kind of pressure is on the head to think of things or to come up with answers, basically for questions that haven't been asked. And this in particular can be a bit of a challenge to our friends if we try to come up with solutions or answers to things that we haven't been asked to answer or solve. And so the pressure on both ends for you, at the head and the root, is to act and to, in a sense, answer where the wisdom for you is getting to the point where you wait, especially for the head, you wait for an invitation, you wait for information, you wait for a signal from others, from the environment, before you share your wisdom, rather than just offering it up front. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
All right. So we've looked at all of the centers going down. We've looked at the heart. We've briefly looked at the spleen and the emotional center. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on both of those. So the spleen has to do with survival and health, and having an open spleen. It's in a sense one of the oldest aspects of life, and even insects have a spleen center. Mammals, reptiles. It's the instinct for self-preservation. It's the immune system. It's the fight or flight response. All of this is in the spleen. And for those who have the defined spleen, it's also about really, really trusting those immediate instinctual responses to the world. Whereas those of us who have it, such as yourself and myself, who have this undefined, we have a lot of lessons to learn about survival, about what is good for us. And very often the challenge is to know, is to believe that something is good for us or not bad for us. But in reality, that's an assumption that needs to be challenged. So this center is often defined with addictions and dependencies, and especially for relationships. So those of us who have an undefined spleen, we can find ourselves getting into and staying in relationships that aren't necessarily healthy for us, because we don't have the wisdom to see that until we go through a long process. And hopefully over the years, we get to the point where we become more and more wise here and don't get ourselves mixed up in relationships that it's popular to call toxic. Toxic really just means that it's not a functional relationship. And that's not because one person is toxic or both people are toxic. It just means that it's not a really good fit. So it's for this the spleen, defined or undefined, because even any of the centers, whether they're defined or undefined, can be dysfunctional. Everybody who has had trauma in their lives can have defined centers that are dysfunctional. In fact, I've met a lot of people with a defined spleen who struggle with addiction because of childhood trauma. So most of the alcoholics that I've looked at the human design charts have a defined spleen, even though the undefined spleen is associated with addiction. But the thing is, any center that's undefined has no reliability. So in a sense, even though it's harder for us to know whether something is healthy or unhealthy for us, because it's an undefined center, we have a lot more flexibility and ability to adjust. Once we know that finally come to the understanding that something is not healthy or good for us, we can change. Whereas someone who has, say, been abused by a parent and drinks as a result of this, because they have a fixed spleen, that trauma can lead to addictions that are very, very hard to stop. So there are positive and negative about defined and undefined all through the charts. Then on the other side of the spleen, on the other side of the sacral, you have the emotional center. And the emotional center basically is an opportunity. Half of the population on the planet have this center defined, and half of the population of the planet have it undefined. So for you as an emotional being, as someone with this defined, this becomes your main authority. Now, in human design, we talk about two very important aspects. We could talk about one's strategy, how we approach the world, how we approach decision making, and then our authority, which is our go-to source for proper decisions. And the thing, so there are several different ways that we have authorities, whereas there are just four different ways for us to have our strategy. So strategy is linked to the design. So as a manifester, your strategy, your approach to the world is to inform. For a generator, the strategy is to wait for the bodily response. In most cases, the or the or or these sort of spontaneous utterances are the response. For the projector, such as myself, the strategy is to wait to be invited to do something. So when a projector takes the initiative on something, tries to start something, it often will lead to nothing, because projectors are meant to be recognized and invited, and then to guide. For the reflector, the strategy is just to be, in a sense. It has to do with because they have no defined centers, reflectors are here to sort of reflect back to the rest of us what's going on. So they're not really supposed to do anything except
just be a mirror,
just be in their own space. Now the authority for most generators, since they're the biggest group, is the sacral itself. For some of them, it is also the emotional center. Basically, generators can have one of two authorities. And so the authority is that part of us that is designed to make decisions that are proper for us, as opposed to mental decisions, which very often lead to undesired results. And so when we learn how to listen to our authority rather than to try to make decisions with the mind, we become more and more how we are designed to operate in this world, and thus experience a lot less friction and a lot more flow in our lives. When we live as ourselves, life tends to flow. When we live as we are expected to be by society and mental conditioning, we tend to get into different types of confrontation and troubles and disappointments.
So again, here, going back to the chart, in my case, when I heard this for the first time, it was up to that point, I always talked about myself as I have a high EQ, like emotional intelligence is present. I'm kind of attuned to other people's emotions. I can feel a lot. Sometimes it felt like I can feel too much. And I was struggling and finding ways to make sense of this whole emotional roller coaster. And when I compared myself to others, and I thought, how can you not feel this? Or like, how are you not distracted by this? I always came back to, so again, something might be wrong because I'm just too emotional. I'm like, what is fucked up with me in this case? So being a manifestor with an emotional authority, maybe you can go into kind of the strategy here.
Okay. Perfect. So the strategy for the manifestor is always to inform, and also, as a sort of a counterpoint to that, the best way to communicate with you is to inform. To communicate with the manifestor, the best way to interact with the manifestor is just to provide information. It's, asking you questions or inviting you to do things is much less of a good way to reach you than just presenting you with information. So to use a slightly inane example, if you're sharing a flat with someone and they say, that sofa would look really good under the window over there, is a much better way to get you involved in saying, could you help me move the sofa?
Mm-hmm.
And so informing is really important for you. It's important for you to share knowledge, to share your understanding, to explain the things that you're doing. This is the manifestor in flow, to be a provider of information and to communicate with others in informative manners. So this is your strategy and your authority. In your case, as a manifestor, you are an initiator rather than a follower. You're not really built to follow. You're not built to really build the world. You're here to share information. Now, so for you, the authority is not about whether you accept someone's invitation or you're responding to somebody's proposal. It's really more about your authority is more about telling you who, when, and where, and how to inform. And so the emotions, because they are not something that is instantaneous, like the instincts of the spleen or life responding through the sacral. Life says yes or no. For the emotions, there is the high, there is the low, there is the excitement, there's the disappointment. There's a whole range of different things going on, and it takes some time. In fact, anybody who has the emotional authority and the emotional center defined is always trumps all other types of possible authority in a chart. So if somebody is one of the 50% of the population that has a defined emotional center, this is how they decide. And the truth is never available in the moment, especially having to do with important decisions. It requires time. So if you have a new project going and you need to inform about it, it's very important that you go through the emotional process of looking at it through the lens of excitement and disappointment, optimism, pessimism, sadness, happiness. And then somehow as the waves continue for a while, some sort of clarity emerges and you go, this is it. This is who I need to talk to. This is what I need to explain. And this is how I need to do it. It just sort of spontaneously erupts into a crystal clearness that gives you the go-ahead to say yes or no or this or that.
Another big one for me takeaway here was just have a sleep over it.
Yes.
Especially if it's big decisions, for instance, investments or kind of relationship topics. Just don't act out of your emotional response. Sleep over it, and the sleepover could turn into like take a week for it, right? There's no defined time where you know after a day or two it. It's just it will come up and you will have a better idea of what it is. But also in that case, it might not be 100% like this. There it is, but it's more like an 80%, and that might be my 100. But it's definitely
could be,
yeah. But it's not in the moment. It's always okay. Let the emotions. Yeah, that helped me a lot. Right.
It's a process. Yeah. I mean, quite a few years ago, when my ex-wife asked for a divorce, it took me 5 months to reach that state of clarity, to know exactly how to respond to this. And I went through all kinds of emotions. I was angry. I was sad. I wanted to beg. I wanted to be forceful. I wanted to do all these things. And I had luckily started my human design process. It was basically the year that I discovered and decided to start on the human design experiment was a few months before she filed for divorce. And so this was my first big test. And it took me 5 months of going through a roller coaster ride of emotions until one day I woke up and everything was completely clear. And then I knew exactly what to do, how to respond. And, even though it's a painful and difficult readjustment to life, I think it ended up going as smoothly as it possibly could because I waited until there was no longer any emotional charge. And that's kind of a key for anybody who has emotional authority, that if there is still a charge, if there is excitement or disappointment or skepticism, any kind of emotional strength still vibrating there, that means that clarity hasn't come yet. Clarity comes at a point where there is no longer any strong emotion for or against. I mean, I've made as many mistakes in my life as somebody with emotional authority by saying yes when I was feeling very charged and emotionally positive towards something, as the times when I've made decisions because I was angry or sad. I mean, ultimately, if there's a charge, there isn't clarity yet. And sometimes the world demands an answer before we're ready to give it. And in that case, it's much better to say, no, thank you. If the pressure is to say yes or no right away, I'm just going to have to say no because I don't have clarity yet. The big mistake comes when we say yes to something that we shouldn't be saying yes to. So the different types of a strategy, we have the information of the manifestor, we have the responding of the generator, we have the waiting for an invitation, recognition and invitation for the projector. So, for example, you inviting me to be part of this podcast is a proper way for a projector to proceed in this world. Even though I might have had some interest in podcasts before, me taking the initiative to do a podcast would probably kind of flounder or limp along, whereas being invited into participating with you in this manner, after you have recognized me as someone who is able to explain human design in a way that excites you, this is the proper way for a projector to do things. And this was basically the key that got me really interested in human design the second time I heard about it, was that when I look back at my life and I looked at my successes and failures, the things that really thrived and the things that sort of went boom, boom, boom. When I thrived, it was because somebody invited me to do something, whether it was to manage a cafe or do this or do that. Every time I'd been invited into a project, it went really, really well. I mean, almost crazily well. And every time I decided mentally that I really should do this, I should get an office space and I should do some advertising, blah, blah, it kind of just limped along and sputtered out into nothing. And when my chart was explained to me that this is the fundamental aspect of being a projector, when you're recognized and when you're invited and when your authority says yes, then you get all the energy you need to do this wonderful guiding and processing that is the role of the projector. Whereas every time I took the initiative because of a mental idea or concept or the pressure from somebody around me, you got to go get a job or whatever, this tended not to go so swimmingly, so successfully. Mm-hmm. So that is the thing for the projector. The projector is particularly good at guiding and particularly good at guiding generators and helping them to function well in this world. Because generators tend to be specialists. Yeah, whether it's specializing in some aspect of science or business or arts, generators tend to be masters in a very specific, special area. Manifestors can manifest along a wide variety of different topics and stuff, but also to tend to be a little bit more specialist. I mean, even though you're a manifestor, you're working within a certain field of self-development and exploring inner worlds through your journeys. And so in one sense, you could say that manifestors and generators are more into specifics, into specialization, whereas projectors and reflectors are more into the general. So as a projector, I'm more of a generalist rather than a specialist. And so my guiding is all about meeting the individual person in front of me and helping something to emerge that leads to an aha or deeper understanding. Now, for the for the manifester, there's really not that many different types of authority. You could have a connection just from the heart to the throat, which would make you an ego manifester, which is a different way of processing how to inform than being an emotional manifester. For the generator, there can either be the sacral, which always says or emotional, which requires also more time to know how to respond to whatever life offers up. For the reflector, it's all about, the reflector is different than the rest of us in that the three first types are sort of solar beings. We are children of the sun, so to speak, in a metaphorical way, whereas the reflector is more ruled by the moon. For a reflector to make a decision properly, they need, because they have nothing defined, because they have nothing truly reliable in their chart in terms of centers, it is only when the moon goes all the way around, say, the horoscope, so to speak, or the human design chart. It takes 28, 29 days for the moon to go through all of its phases. And so for the reflector to make a good decision, they need to wait for the moon to go through all of the different aspects of the chart, which takes 29 days for the moon. And so in this sense, they are lunar beings. Reflectors can, in some ways, it's even more difficult for them to make decisions than anybody else, because they can never know the truth in the moment. They can never know the truth in 1 week. They need the full 4 weeks or so to get the clarity to make decisions.
For me, and this was something, probably the most valid thing that I took away from the chart reading the first time, and I actually wrote it down and I read it out loud for me for weeks and months, actually, was that part that says my connection from the emotional center to the throat, which is unique and gives me kind of individual ways of expressing myself.
Yeah.
I could be, you said you could be a professor or an artist. Whatever it is, I'm here to inspire other people.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at in my communication skills.
Yeah.
Very emotionally intelligent and intelligently sound. This is one of my gifts. And then it came up, obviously, the whole idea of talking, using this, one of the gifts, communicating in a podcast format, and then combining it with the emotional authority, this expressing or finding words to express feelings, which is really hard, obviously, but getting this whole emotional sense of my story to other people and using this as a means to live according to my design. And then this, obviously, the podcast came out of it, but other things as well. So this helped me a lot to understand more about this emotional aspect of myself, rather than I'm so emotional sometimes compared to other men, especially, and then seeing this as a huge gift that I now can use when I do one-on-one work with people or in groups and combine it somehow. So,
well, I mean, one of the things that makes you unique is that you have 3 centers defined. You have the ajna, or the mind, you have the throat, and you have the emotional center. So your throat, that part of you which that sort of expresses the sound that becomes something that manifests in reality, is both inspired and influenced by your emotions and your mind. So you have this wonderful combination of both of these things. You have a very strong mind. You have 5 of the gates in the ajna defined, and you have 4 of the gates in the emotional center defined. And so this gives you many different ways of thinking, many different ways of expressing emotions, and so it's really quite rare in this life to find people who both have the mental and the emotional connected to the throat, and is able to express both intelligently and intellectually, as well as putting words to emotions in a way that can resonate. So this is your gift to mankind or humankind or womankind or whatever is the politically correct way of expressing it. Your gift is this sort of almost balanced sense of emotional and mental understandings that is then expressed in particularly elegant ways.
This is exactly what I do now when I guide people, and what I always tell them is I lead them on a path where I let them meet heart and brain, so to say. And this is pretty much what I do now for a living. And this is the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. And according to the chart, this is exactly what the chart says. So for me, this was a big, let's say, milepost on the way to come to a point where I am now. So yeah, that was hugely important for me.
For me, still to this day, there is one part of my mind that says, how is it possible that the position of the planets can describe me so well? I mean, there is this underlying skepsis that is part of I guess, being someone with a defined ajna such as yourself, that there's something kind of non-scientific about it, or that pulls on strings of skepsis that say, yeah, but how is this possible? And yet my experience over the years of trying this out anyway, it's like, I don't care what the explanation is for why human design works. It's just that without, listening to any guru telling me what to do, by following what this chart, what this map of me says is me, and living according to that rather than according to the pressures that society puts on me, I found that things flow so much easier in my life. There's much less bitterness for me. And bitterness is the not self keynote for a projector. So each of the four types has a not self keynote. So for you, as a manifester, it's anger. The self keynote is peace. So when you're feeling a sense of peace, you have that is feedback in the sense that you have been living your design. And when you feel anger, which is probably something a lot of manifestor children feel, because you always want to take the initiative, and sometimes the parents don't agree with this and suppress it to a certain degree. So there is this anger that arises from not being treated with the kind of respect and honor that you deserve. For the generator, when they are acting from not self, there is a sense of frustration with the world, frustration with the job, frustration with people, etc. This is feedback to the generator that they have not been responding and listening to the responses that their body have come with. So when they are doing well, the keynote is satisfaction. So for the manifester, it's anger and peace. For the generator, it's frustration and satisfaction. For the projector, who takes the initiative, who doesn't wait for the recognition and the invitation, who makes a decision, say, for me with the emotional center defined, I need time. If I make a quick decision, any aspect of myself that I'm not living according to my design can lead to bitterness. And I've certainly felt bitterness at different times of my life, directing it at other people's horrible treatment of me, oh dear. And then sort of realizing through the experiment of the last almost 7 years is that bitterness comes when I haven't acted as myself. And so it's been a great revelation for me that my not self keynote, in this case bitterness, is feedback to me that I have not been true to myself, rather than somebody else has mistreated me or dishonored me or whatever. For the reflector, briefly, it's disappointment and surprise. The reflector tends to be disappointed with most people, because most people have never heard of human design and aren't really living. I mean, on occasion, you have people who are really, really just very lucky and learn to live as who they are. But most people are conditioned and are living who we are expected to be, or responding negatively by trying to be something else. Say, during the 80s, you had the whole punk movement, which wasn't necessarily who people were, but they were sort of reacting to and pushing back on some of society's demands. But that wasn't any more real than being the good bee and working in the hive and being a productive member of society. Anyway, so we have these different keynotes that let us know, are we living as ourselves, or are we living slightly to the side of ourselves? And so that's one good way of measuring things.
Another fascinating element here is, I forgot about this part actually, but when I now explain here on the podcast and in conversations with others, what I search, like what is the purpose of this whole spiritual quest and what I'm actually trying to accomplish, then I say it's inner peace. And now you say this is a sign that I'm living according to my true self. So this is exactly what I'm searching for, peace.
Yeah, when you feel that peace, it's not really a concept, it's an experience. When you feel peace, and it might be fleeting, it might last for days, whatever, that's an indication that you have been informing correctly, that you've waited through an emotional process to get to clarity and expressed yourself according to that. Then peace will be the feedback, the feeling that is a feedback that, yes, you have been living as yourself. Whereas if you find yourself getting angry at yourself or someone else, this is generally feedback that something wasn't done quite according to who you are, whether it's making a decision too quickly, or failing to inform somebody about something important, or whatever.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Okay, before I get to the definitions and the types, there's one other thing that's worth understanding. So one of the key aspects of the 4 different types of designs that we can have, whether it's manifestor, generator, projector, or reflector, as each of these types has sort of a slightly different, or even very different, aura or energy field, or sort of energetic interaction with other people. So the manifestor has a field, an aura that is kind of prickly. It's not warm and embracing. It's kind of like the energy of lightning or a spark plug. It's meant to get things going. You know, there are theories about the beginning of life coming from different chemicals in tidal pools being hit by lightning or other electrical sources to get that spark of life going. So your energy as a manifestor, it's because of the nature of getting things started, of initiating, of lighting the spark. It's not a comfortable and embracing type of aura. And so this is very important for you as a manifestor to understand that even if you say nothing, you walk into the room, your aura is already speaking for you in a sense, and it's pushing away a little bit. It's also a protective factor. Yeah, it's very intense. The generator has an aura that is impersonal and it's life itself. You sit next to someone on the bus or at a cafe or pass them on the street or hang out with a friend that's a generator, and there is this sort of healing, embracing aura of life itself. There's something regenerating and healing and helpful and pleasant about it. The thing is with the generator is that they can't direct their aura. Same thing for a manifestor. You don't direct your aura at people. People passing through it will feel it in one way or another. So for the generator, we're lucky that 70% of the population are generators, because this life force is then being shared with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's two different experiences of walking into a room. When the generator walks in, it doesn't have the impact of a manifestor walking in. Now, for the projector, in contrast to these first two, the aura or the energy field is kind of pointed and directed and a little bit more personal. So projectors have an aura that can sort of penetrate or pierce through the aura of another person. And so projectors have to be really, really careful about waiting to be invited before doing this. Otherwise, when a projector puts their energy on someone else uninvited, it can feel rather invasive and uncomfortable for the other person. So this is one of the reasons projectors need to be invited. Another reason is that by being invited and listening to one's authority correctly, a projector is then given some of the energy necessary to do guiding correctly. So for me, as a projector with my piercing aura or energy field, when I'm guiding someone, in a sense, I have access to inner thoughts and feelings and it's not necessarily a conscious process, but we projectors are designed with this aura to be able to guide very uniquely for each person that we're talking to. Mm-hmm. And finally, the reflector has an aura that is kind of like Teflon. Because they are so open, they need this protective aura to help them deal with life. Otherwise, they would be overwhelmed by everything and curl up in a ball and not be able to do much. But because their auras deflect, projector aura, manifestor aura, generator aura, they tend to be able to function relatively well because they're not being invaded by the energies of others all the time. All right, so the way you're designed affects how you interact with people energetically. As you say, a manifestor walking into the room will make an impact. A projector, say, taking an initiative to establish a relationship with someone can be seen as creepy or uninteresting or a pain in the ass because that intention that the attention that comes with this penetrating aura can be really comfortable for someone who's not interested. For generators in general, it's just pretty much pleasant either way. But it's important to understand these differences so that we understand that when someone, if I take the initiative to ask somebody to dance, for example, and I get rejected, it's not because there's something wrong with me. It's because I haven't honored the fact that my aura can be uncomfortable for someone who hasn't invited me instead. Anyway, so that's the auras. When it comes to definitions, in your case, you have three centers that are all linked together in a sort of circuit board. You have the ajna, the ajna, which is the mind. You have the throat, which is communication, and you have the emotional center, which obviously is emotions. And they're all linked together in one circuit. So if you think of a computer circuit board with transistors and stuff, it's like all of these centers are linked together with these channels between them in one complete circuit. Whereas in my particular chart, I have the top two centers connected to each other, and then nothing linking them to my emotional center, which is also connected to the ego or heart and the root. So I have one circuit that is root, emotional center, heart, and a different circuit which is mind and head, ajna and head. And so that is what is called a split definition, where I have two different circuitries that are not connected together. You have single definition because all of your defined centers are part of the same circuitry. It's also possible to have more than two separate circuits. You can have 3 or 4, and possibly even 5. And in that case, it tends to be people like your friend who has 8 defined centers. Then there's a good chance that there are 3 or 4 different circuitries. So you have single definition, you have split definition, triple definition, quadruple definition, and so on. And each of these types of definition shape our relationships to the world. So you, as someone with single definition, don't really need anything or anyone to complete your sense of functioning wholly as yourself. Your mind and your emotions are connected together, and so you have access to both at the same time. There is no sort of innate drive within you to complete a circuit. Whereas for me, with a split a definition, there is a sort of greater need for relationships to people, whether it's friendships or romantic or business or whatever it is. There is this sort of desire, because I have a very strong mind with the head and ajna defined through the channel of logic, and also very strong emotions. I kind of have to flip or switch between these two different modes of seeing the world. Either I'm experiencing something emotionally, or I am processing something logically, mentally. And it is very rare where I am in a situation, mostly in group situations, where my mental and my emotional are connected together into one circuit. And so this becomes a driving force in my life where I want access to both at the same time instead of flipping between the two. For you, this is not an issue since everything is in one single definition. So you have access to both aspects at the same time. Mm-hmm. For someone who has a triple definition or more, there is more of a need to be in groups and different constellations. So for you as a single definition, there isn't this drive to be with other people. It's more of a simple, easy choice in life. For someone with a split definition, there is this sort of innate urge to connect with one person or sometimes a certain group in order to feel like everything is whole. And for someone with more than one split, triple definition or more, it takes often groups and different constellations. So triple definitions tend to be much more social and need to go out and drink with the guys or hang out with the girls or whatever it is. It's harder for them to find satisfaction in just one person in order to feel that they can express themselves fully. And then, of course, you have the zero definition of the reflector, where there are no complete circuits whatsoever, and that's also just a different way of processing. Reflectors will tend to change personality several times a day as they interact with different people and as the moon moves around the sky. Reflectors are very inconsistent in how they present themselves to the rest of the world. So that's the definitions. Now, the lines that defined your type, in your case, you are a 4-6 opportunistic role model. These numbers come from your sun, both your personality sun and your design sun, which personality is the conscious black bit of the chart, and the design is more of the unconscious red part of the chart. So these numbers that you see up to your right, the red and black numbers, they represent the position of the sun, the moon, the nodes, Mercury, and so on, as they are correlated with the different hexagrams that are associated with the combination of the astrological chart and the I Ching. And so because we're talking about the I Ching and hexagrams, there are always 6 lines in a hexagram, hex being 6, of course. And so for you, you have the sun in gate 49, hexagram 49, which you also call the gate, line 6. So as the sun moves all around the year, a full cycle around the year, it will go through all 64 hexagrams, all 64 gates, all 64 codons. And as it goes through a hexagram, it'll go through line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, and then move on to the next hexagram and start over again. So your sun is in gate 49-6 when measured 3 months before your birth, and at the time of your birth, it's in gate or hexagram 23, line 4. And these two lines, the 4 and the 6, have become your definition. So you are an opportunistic role model. Each of these different lines represents a different approach to the world. So line 1 has to do with investigation, exploring the world. It's like, what's this? What's this? How does this work? And it has to do with studying and understanding things more from research and experience and figuring things out. Line 2 is the line of the hermit. The hermit has to do with, so whereas line 1 processes the world through investigation, line 2 processes the world through introspection, from going inside. So the hermit or the line 2 needs a lot of time alone. About 50% of every week, a hermit, a line 2 should spend their time outside of the aura of other people in their own space and just allowing some sort of understanding to emerge from that kind of situation. The third line, which is it has to do with trial and error. Ra, having a slight sense of humor, calls the third line the martyr. It's a little bit maybe exaggerated, but the third line is all about trial and error. It's kind of like learning to walk or learning to ride a bike or learning to drive a car. At first, we're not very good at it. We make some mistakes and we overcompensate. And maybe when walking, we'll topple over to the left or topple forward or backwards until somehow all of these little overcompensations lead us to sort of a happy middle ground where we're able to walk and run and etc. Same thing with learning to ride a bicycle. So the 3 is all about trial and error, and making mistakes for a line 3 is just as valuable as successes, if not more, because it gives that ability to refine and master something. Then we come to line 4, which is the first line for you. And this has to do with connecting to other people. Line 4s tend to have a lot of friends, not necessarily intimate, close friends, but they tend to be really good at making connections and having connections. So it's called opportunistic in the sense that you are able to see opportunity perhaps where others don't. You're very good at connecting people together in new constellations, and it's kind of about networking and the power that you have of your networking skills and opportunities. Mm-hmm. And then the other line, the next line out of the 6 is the 5th line. The 5th line is sort of the epitome, the peak in the cycle of going through the 6 lines. So it's like getting to that point where a certain experience can then be generalized and universalized and understood as a lesson. So the fifth line is all about taking the specific and turning it into something universal. And this often means redefining things that maybe have been established. So the fifth line is called the heretic in the system. The fifth line can be seen as the savior or the demon, the person who comes in with the solution or its opposite. And so the fifth line is, because it's called the line of universality, it's sort of the moment where all of the experiences of the first four lines are crystallized into a new understanding. Sometimes, or another way of saying it, because it's a universal line, a universalization line, it isn't specific. And so it kind of becomes a mirror for projection. And so fifth lines are sometimes raised up on a pedestal and then torn down again, because it's almost impossible to see the fifth line for who they are. It's all about the potentialities and the greater lessons. And then when you get to the sixth line, it's kind of, for the female, it's the crone stage of life. For the male, it's kind of the wise old man, the sage sitting on the mountaintop or whatever. So the sixth line is the role model. And to get to the role model level of things, life experience is required. So for the role model to really come into their own, that doesn't really happen until around age 50. For the first almost 30 years of life, the role model is going through sort of the stage of being a three, trial and error, making mistakes, learning from the misconceptions and different things. And then so this cycle ends with the Saturn return, when Saturn comes back to the place it was at the time of birth. And then from about 29, 30 until 50, it's about integration and observing others. And then at a certain point, around 50, the role model, the line 6, we call it coming down off of the roof and being the inspiration and in many senses, the guide for others that comes with having this deeper wisdom that comes from a life of exploration and understanding. And so for you as a 4-6, you are basically someone who can use your ability to connect with a lot of people and establish different networks. And as you are aging towards age 50, you're coming more and more into your own as someone who can be an inspiration for other people. People look at you and say, I want to be like him. I want to learn from him. I want to understand from him. It's not like this can't happen already at age 7 or something like that. Like a Greta Thunberg at 18 is a role model for a lot of people. And she happens to be a line 6 as well. But there's something that comes with the maturity of a life lived at least 50 years, where that transforms into something sort of as a catalyst. And so we can have different combinations of these different lines. I'm a 5-1, you're a 4-6, you can have a 2-4 or a 3-1. There's many different combinations of these lines. And so that adds, again, to the uniqueness of individuals. In addition to that, we can look even deeper and see which environments are the most fruitful for us to thrive in, whether it's work or a living situation. How to eat can be something that we can look at a little more in depth. For example, for me, it's not about what I eat, but how I eat. And I need calm around me. I do not digest well if there's loud music or loud conversations going on. For me, it is very useful to sit in a corner quietly and eat. Whereas the son of a friend of mine is the opposite. He needs to sort of jump up and walk around and talk loudly and have music around him in order to digest properly. Other variants are some people should eat everything that they eat during daylight hours, and others should eat when it's not daylight, when there isn't direct sunlight. So we have different ways of approaching food that allow us to absorb our nutrients and digest more correctly. And these are things that one can look at more in depth when getting a chart interpretation, such as I offer.
Yeah, well, this is the perfect ending, because like you just mentioned, there's so much more and so many more details that can come out of this chart. And when I thought about making a podcast out of this, I knew already that this will be really hard to comprehend and to fit into a 60-minute podcast recording, which is why we took more time today to get a rough idea of what human design is as a concept, and then just giving a different or outlining the different types we have, the different strategies we can apply accordingly, what a definition is, and how you can kind of lead a life according to this blueprint, which is human design, so you feel more of who you truly are, your true self. And my invitation for people would be to just try it out, because it's not a huge investment time-wise and financially, and it's just something that you can do and then reflect upon. You don't have to, like we said before, you don't have to believe or follow anyone. You just get the chart, you get the reading, and you will see for yourself what it shows you. And for me, it was really mind-blowing. And I still to this day use parts of it to remind myself that I'm not fucked up or that I'm not missing anything. It's more like giving me the better idea of where my strengths are and where I'm kind of defined and have a stronger self of certain elements of myself, and where there's a lot of room for growth or adaptability, which I can then use for other purposes. And it gave me a great way of dealing with those feelings of unworthiness and this constant search for something that's not yet here, and the missingness of something. It helped me a lot. So it's a great tool. It was, at least for me, a great tool to give my mind a little rest, so to speak, to not always try to solve the mystery of my own life, hence searching for answers anywhere and then coming to the point that there's too much and I'm still not enough. But this gave me just a really basic blueprint of my whole self and the way I interact with the world and other people. And now I can relate to it. And it just, gives me a more calm feeling about it's exactly how it is. And I'm not screwed or anything. It's just, that's how I'm kind of programmed. And there's a certain way that I can live accordingly to feel more in flow and in alignment with my own energies. And then there's certain other ways where I don't feel this, and I can see it through, like you mentioned in my case, when I feel anger, this just could be a sign that I'm not living up to my true self and the way I should, and things like that. So it's a great way for people to get a better understanding of who they truly are on a base level. And I invite them to reach out to you for a more specific version of their own chart and reading. And the question obviously comes up, how could people reach you, Justus, for that?
Well, I can give you my phone number and my email address, and I suppose you can put it in the comments of your podcast. I also have a webpage, but I have to admit I haven't really updated it much, but it gives a little bit of an overview of what I do, so I can include that as well.
Cool.
I think to sum up what you just said, the thing about human design that I find really exciting is that the invitation is not to believe, but to try out, to experiment. Does this resonate with me? Well, maybe it doesn't resonate at first mentally, but it might resonate through experience. So it's an opportunity to try something out without believing and just see what happens when we live more according to what the chart says is our most natural nature versus how the expectations of parents and friends and society have pushed us to, I guess, a level of happiness that, there's this frustration or self-doubt or whatever else comes with trying to adapt to the norms and expectations of society rather than truly embracing who we naturally are.
Perfect summary. And I think there's nothing more to add. So I'll invite people to reach out to you for more information and then just explore the concept itself and live and experience rather than believe it. You don't have to believe it. You just live it and then you see for yourself. Personally speaking, it helped me a lot and it gave me more clear perspective on the way I function properly, and I'll continue to use it going forward. So thanks, Justus, a lot for this
Thank you.
Lecture on human design and the wisdom. And it's always a pleasure listening to all of the insights you can share. And yeah, I wish you a wonderful continuous experiment and journey along your charts. And hopefully you'll be able to help a lot more other people than you did with me already. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. And I also wish you a wonderful day.
Thanks, Justus. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Right. Take care. Bye-bye.